Happy Wednesday, everyone. Or should I say, happy yoga day. Yep, it really is. And in honor of it, I'm going to stretch your memory back to the webinar we did almost 2 months ago on the then upcoming Energy Code hearings. That was the preview webinar. And today's webinar is the 2018 Code Hearings Roundup, what we know now. And it's brought to you by NV Energy. Codes are a hot topic right now as the ICC's online voting results were released 8 days ago. Maureen Guttman of BCAP is here to provide us with an overview of the most recent code hearings. If you aren't familiar with Maureen Guttman, let me introduce you to her. She's a licensed architect with over 25 years of experience in energy efficient and green building design. As president of the Building Codes Assistance Project, Maureen oversees a nationwide campaign to support the development and adoption of current model energy codes. In addition, she directs several technical, outreach, and advocacy projects to help various stakeholder groups realize the benefits of energy codes and efficient buildings. She has served on several energy and green construction code development boards, including the Development Committee for the International Green Construction Code, and she just recently served on the Public Hearing Committee for the Commercial Energy Code. In 2010, Maureen was awarded the President's Award by the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Institute of Architects in recognition of a career dedicated to advancing building code adoption and enforcement and incorporation of sustainability into regulated building practices. Maureen earned a bachelor's degree in architecture from Carnegie Mellon University. Now before we get started, I need to tell you about PowerShift by NV Energy. You can never save too much energy or money. That's why NV Energy has introduced PowerShift to help its residential and business customers conserve even more energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift by NV Energy is also about providing you with excellent customer service. It's your one-stop shop to find all the energy-efficient products and services to help you boost your bottom line, along with convenient ways to manage your account. PowerShift Energy Advisors are dedicated to working side by side with business customers to discuss their needs and to find energy efficiency solutions that save money. Plus, their Business Solutions Center is the place to go to discuss your bill payments and account-related questions. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. I have one other important announcement to make. Green Builder Media would like to invite you to attend their upcoming Sustainability Symposium 2017, Ready for Anything, on January 9th, 2017, at the Dr. Phillips Center for Performing Arts in downtown Orlando, Florida. This pioneering event will direct a laser focus on how cities, communities, businesses, building professionals, and homeowners can work together to viably move sustainability and energy efficiency activities, policies, and initiatives forward in what will presumably be a challenging political environment. They've got quite a lineup, including Governor Martin O'Malley, Philippe Cousteau, NASCAR driver Leilani Munter, Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer, Dr. Carlton Hall of the Kennedy Space Center, South Miami Mayor Dr. Philip K. Stoddard, and Mayor Jim Brainerd of Carmel, Indiana. Space is limited, so register today at greenbuildermedia.com. Now, during the course of today's presentation, you can submit questions for our guest. Simply use the questions box on the right side of your screen. I'll review those questions and pose them to Maureen during the Q&A time set aside after her presentation. Maureen, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to have been invited to talk to you a little bit about what has happened in the development of the 2018 IECC, specifically the residential energy provisions going forward. We are just finishing up a very busy year of trying to improve energy efficiency in the next code cycle, as well as improve the activity of ICC members and involvement in voter participation. So I want to start a little bit with why we're doing what we do, why BCAP does what we do, why the associations that we affiliate with do what they do in terms of promoting energy efficiency and trying to improve the codes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, the history, which is kind of the why, the challenge, what is it we've been trying to do, the approach, how did we try and do it, and what's the result, where are we in terms of the codes as they look like they are going to be published for 2018. You've probably seen this slide or something similar, although this one's relatively new from PNNL. This shows the development of both the commercial and residential model energy codes since the 70s. Excuse me. The green line represents the efficiency level of the residential code, the IECC, over the course of however many, 30, 40 years. And, you know, you can see that there was a long period of incremental change and then a very short period of huge change. This was a substantial success from the standpoint of those of us who were trying to get the code moving forward, becoming more energy efficient, but it was a strain for people in practice, design professionals, builders, code officials, everyone, you know, and there was a lot of talk after the 2012 cycle of quote-unquote code fatigue. Too hard to learn this many changes, too hard to incorporate and make the construction practices different to accommodate these requirements. We need more time. We're not caught up. So that resulted in a 2015 code, as you can see, with a very, very minor improvement in efficiency. I think the DOE analysis for the residential code was 1.8% or something like that. So you know, looking like a flat line. So who knew what we were going to do in 2018? I think that there were some of us that knew that we wanted to get a little bit more of a boost than 1.8% to make up. The slides that I'm going to show you are kind of just a quick timeline of adoptions. And the first one was about code development and the analysis of the stringency of the model codes just as published. Here we're going to show you code adoptions. So the gray is states that did not have up-to-date energy codes prior to 2000. Well, at the time, at the beginning of this slide is 2009. And then the blues, as they get progressively darker, the blues are showing the more stringent versions of the code, with the darkest one ultimately being the 2015, which you'll see at the end. And what's really interesting about this is how much impact the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act had on adoptions, which occurred in 2009, and we started seeing pretty broad adoption of the 2009 Energy Code. So I'm just going to go through these quickly, July, and then next January. So you can see states really jumped on board with adoption of the 2009, which is that medium blue color. And then the 2012 was published, and there were a lot of progressive states that were adopting the 2012. And then we got to the point where the 2015 code was released, and so we've got a handful of states that are currently using the 2015 code, and will be many more that will be advancing to the 2015 code in the next year. But you can see the point here is that adoptions are happening, but they are not even, they are not consistent, and even within states where they are adopted, they're not completely used to a point where you could say that you've got 100% compliance with these energy codes. So we're not getting the energy savings promised by the codes as published. In other words, if it shows that it's had a 1.8% improvement over the last code, we're not even sure that we're getting that because of adoption practices and actual construction and compliance practices. Moreover, the codes only cover 66% of the energy use in buildings. That's a lot, and it's substantial, and you know we're pleased with that. But there is a lot of energy consumption that occurs, plug loads, for example, and process loads, that is not covered by the codes. So we're really only able to affect 2/3 of the energy use in the building via the building codes. So you may also be familiar with the Architecture 2030 Challenge, which was issued, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now, which is the idea to put the building sector on a path to carbon neutrality, to be using fuels that do not consume, to be using non-fossil fuels to operate buildings. And the challenge leaves us where we should, at this point, today, 2015 was, this analysis was from, be using 70% less fossil fuel energy, which for the most part you can assume is most of the energy being used in buildings right now, 70% less than, say, a baseline from the beginning of the century. Unfortunately, where our code is currently, our 2012-2015 code, it's not 70% more efficient than the codes in 2003, 2006. It's about 30 to 40% more efficient than the codes in 2003, 2006. So the code, assuming we were getting compliance, assuming we were getting complete adoption, the code's not getting us to where we need to go yet. We really need to push the code if we're going to use it as the primary tool for meeting these carbon reduction goals. If you take into account, if you take into account those unregulated loads, the plug loads, the 33%, if you take into account inconsistent adoption, inconsistent compliance, somewhat inconsistent enforcement, you can make a fairly good guess that our actual energy savings from codes is even less than where the most current code baseline would put us. So where we really are, that blue line compared to where we should be in terms of either the light yellow or the darker yellow, you can see there's a pretty substantial delta if in fact we are going to meet some of these objectives related to sustainability for communities and for states across the country. So what do we want to do about it? What did we set as goals for ourselves for this code cycle? Well, the Energy Efficient Codes Coalition, in conjunction with a bunch of other partners that I will identify in a second, developed a program this year to do outreach to municipal officials, to code officials, to voting members of the ICC, to try and make them aware of the fact that you don't realize probably that the people that work in your community are responsible for writing this basically national energy policy that is the model energy codes. So we partnered together with organizations like the National Association of Regional Councils, the ICLEI, which is Local Governments for Sustainability, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, IMT, etc., and a lot of other partners as well, to do really intense outreach to mayors, to like I said, voting code officials, etc., to really inform them of the opportunity that voting provides, inform them of the opportunity that CDP Access as a new tool provides, and to say this is the way we help improve energy efficiency regulation in the built environment is through the building codes. So it was a lot of outreach, a lot of education in a lot of cities, with the goal of trying to get this curve that we looked at the beginning on a path toward being net zero. Now, as you can see, this modest curve goes all the way out to 2050. If it were to go to 2030, it would be a much steeper curve and probably be even more resisted than the current codes are being resisted now. But this is the plan, just get something steady going to avoid these big jumps that really do cause legitimate code fatigue, and just put the codes on a path of predictable energy efficiency incremental improvements without rollbacks, without trade-offs, without decreases in major provisions of the code, and just keep steadily going forward so we can meet these national goals for fossil fuel reduction and energy efficiency. So how did we do that? We created this program, as I said, of outreach, of education. We did a lot of webinars. We did a lot of face-to-face meetings. Some of you may have been touched by this initiative. I hope so. I hope we reached some of you. We were really focused on getting people registered to be voting members of IECC, and then helping people use the CDP Access tool, and to the extent that people were interested, giving them advice on what the code proposals were about and which ones were going to be improvements for energy efficiency for the next code cycle. So you've probably seen other organizations produce voting guides of some sort to help people understand what the proposal says in a short little blurb and what recommendations we would make, EECC and BCAP, relative to voting. So this is just an example of something that we had produced prior to the hearings for folks to say, well, here's what the proposal says, here's what the public comments that have been published would do, and the column in red and green is the EECC recommendations for voters. You know, support D means that it's complicated. If you voted on CDP access, you understand that the standing motion is D, so I either support it or oppose it. And if you oppose it, you end up with something that would be a version of approved. It's a little complicated. Once you've done it, it becomes a lot simpler. But the point is that we were really trying to make clear that some proposals were going to promote and boost energy efficiency in the code, and other proposals were likely to roll back energy efficiency or take things to a lower level of efficiency than what we currently have. So what EECC did is identify very specifically a number of proposals that strengthen the code, and we were working very hard to get those passed, and a number of proposals that would substantially weaken the code. And these are both in terms of energy efficiency. There were a lot of other codes that were being considered in this code cycle. The ones that we were concerned about were the residential and commercial energy codes. These slides are only relative to the residential code proposals, but we have obviously all the information is available now for the results on all of the code voting. So we looked at these. We looked at a lot of proposals. We looked at all of the code proposals on the residential and commercial code that were published and made recommendations on them. But these were some really big ones that were going to make a big deal in terms of increasing the code's stringency or weakening it. And I'm going to just go through a couple of the results of what we got from the voting. The voting occurred, it was a strange process this year where at the public comment hearings in Kansas City in October, all of the body assembly had the opportunity to vote on all of these items, and then those votes were kind of just advisory for the final CDP access voting process, which is where the final votes were taken. So the voting, in-person votes didn't count as such, but what they did do was allow for modifications to be put into the final version of what went into CDP access. So there were very important things that happened at the in-person meeting that it impacted what showed up in CDP access. But the actual voting on the proposals occurred online. And from what we understand from ICC, there was an explosion of participation, which is great news, really terrific news, whether people are voting for or against the things that I wanted them to vote for. It's great to have more people involved in the process. That's certainly the underlying reason why ICC developed CDP access, so that they could get more members engaged in the process, not have to travel, not have to be out of the office for days and days and days on end. So that's really good news that they had maybe 3 to 4 times as many people participating. So just in brief, I'm going to just show a couple of the things that were results from the hearing, from the CDP Access online voting, and start with some of these things that we think are going to be modest improvements to the efficiency results for the residential energy code. RE22 was a proposal that suggested that instead of the current requirement that there be under slab insulation for heated slabs that only goes a certain distance in from the edge of the slab, that this would require R5 insulation under the entire area of the heated slab. So it's all the way under the slab, which is probably, I mean, just if you think about it, you probably think intuitively, well, yeah, that makes sense. Well, in fact, the science shows that a heated slab, an uninsulated heated slab is going to have a heck of a lot more energy lost than a uninsulated unheated slab. I think that makes sense too. You know, it's heated. There's more energy in that slab. So without the insulation, you're losing a lot more energy. You're spending a lot more money on energy to be wasted through the ground. And this proposal will probably provide a very modest increase in energy efficiency overall. Certainly it's going to help people with their energy costs by lowering the amount of energy it takes to keep their house warm. So we thought this was a great improvement, and we're pleased to see that it was passed by the membership. Another improvement, modest improvement, was RE31 that changed the U factor for fenestration in climate zones 3 through 8, took it down a notch. This was a proposal that was submitted by NAHB with really good documentation as to how this related to Energy Star and the Energy Star availability of Energy Star windows, what the factors are, what the U factors are for currently available windows, and that this was a reasonable change to make because the market appeared ready to be able to absorb a more efficient window in these climate zones. So this was an easy slam dunk for all of us to be in support of. This passed readily. We don't know the final votes on any of these changes yet. Those will not be released by ICC, I think, until January. But this passed, and this is great. This means that windows in residential buildings will be a little bit better, and they are, apparently these factors are readily available in the marketplace. The good thing about this, and the important thing about focusing on windows, is as you know, even the world's best window is still a crappy wall when you talk about thermal transfer and heat loss, heat gain. So, you know, the more stringent we can make the requirements on windows, the better off we're doing relative to the envelope as a whole. This next one, I'm sure, got a lot of attention, even outside the people who were participating in the voting process. There was a lot of run-up to the hearings in terms of proposals that were related to the ERI, the Energy Rating Index, in the code, relative to changing the numbers, making clear that solar or on-site renewable energy was included. We could talk a little bit about the administrative provisions that address this as well. And a lot of people on both sides of the perspective as to whether or not renewable energy was included and whether or not numbers should be increased were loaded for bear, I guess, would be one way of saying it, in terms of going into the hearings. But remarkably and happily, all of these people got together before this particular proposal was heard on the floor and offered to withdraw several other proposals that would have been much more, I think, difficult for certainly energy efficiency proponents to accept, and came up with this agreed upon modified version of RE 173. So essentially what goes on here, as you can see, they're increasing the required ERI in every climate zone by a couple of points. Now, you know that the ERI is roughly comparable to a HERS score. So if you have a HERS, you used to be required to have a HERS score of 51, which would mean 49% better than the average home in that area at a certain point in time. Now the number is 57, so it's a slight decrease in required efficiency. Your number goes up, that means it's slightly less efficient. But the real key here was this argument over on-site renewables, and if on-site renewables are included in these numbers, there's a lot of information out there that said that was really a huge loophole, because you can get a lot of points for including solar, for example, without doing the needed energy efficiency to get the number where it should be. So we were very concerned about the numbers including solar and taking it as a loophole. What this compromise did was say that if solar is included in these numbers, in these revised numbers, then the building has to meet the envelope requirements of the 2015 code. If currently what it says is if the building is no matter what, if you're using the ERI path, you have to meet all of the mandatory requirements of the 2009 code. So 2009 is approximately, I don't know, somewhat just less than 20% less efficient than the 2015. So the 2015 is a good bit more efficient than the 2009. So the essence here is if you are including on-site renewables in the project, the building envelope has to meet the requirements of the 2015 IECC, which are considerably more stringent. If you're not including on-site renewables, then you only need to meet the requirements, all the mandatory requirements of the 2009 IECC. So it's a pretty good difference. It's a good compromise. In the nature of compromise, no one was thrilled, but everyone was, willing to accept this and be satisfied, and put to bed, this argument about whether or not solar is or should be included in the energy efficiency code. So, I think in general this is going to make a lot of builders more anxious to use, more eager to use this ERI compliance path, which is terrific because it really is basically a performance path, and I think it's what we need to move toward it in general. And acknowledging the fact that in order to get to net zero, which I started here telling you that is our ultimate goal, you need to have the on-site renewable power. So this was a good win for everybody, I think, although not a measurable increase in energy efficiency, but a good result coming out of a good collaborative process. Now some of the things that happened that were less felicitous, although again, nothing that's a huge deal breaker in terms of energy efficiency loss, but there are quantifiable losses to some of these proposals that did in fact pass. Now this RE17 was something that the Energy Efficient Codes Coalition and BCAP and others, we were opposed to because it allows log homes to be exempt from meeting the envelope requirements of the IECC if they're designed in accordance with the ICC 400, which is the standard for log home construction. Now, that seems like a reasonable proposal, but there are a lot of reasons why this is a pretty gigantic loophole. There are a lot of problems with ICC 400. Namely, I don't think that it includes a provision for air sealing, or the provision for air sealing is a lot less stringent than it is for the IECC. So right there you've got a loophole. But also lots of questions about, how even just the definition of log home. There is really no definition. Does it have to be completely constructed of log? Can it just be one story? Is log construction? In any case, the analysis that was done by our contractor was that the rollback of this compared to a mass wall is up to 23% in energy loss in the coldest climate zones. It would probably be even more compared to conventional stick framing in terms of an energy loss. Now, I guess the saving grace, if there is such a thing, is figuring out how many homes are built using this type of construction right now. And I think we don't know the answer to that. I tried to get in touch with the Census Bureau to see if they had information on that. They do not. It's kind of rolled into their other types of construction data. But I suspect that it's probably less than 10% in everywhere in the country, although in all likelihood more prevalent in northern climates where the energy differential is going to be greater. So it's a problem, and it's a concern for us, and we are sorry that this particular rollback occurred. We hope that when states adopt the 2018 code that they will consider eliminating this particular provision and keeping the more stringent provisions in there for log home construction. Sorry about my phone ringing. I guess I didn't know how to turn it off, and there you go. RE100 was also one that EECC, BCAP, and others were opposed to because it had a kind of a provision in it. In general, the proposal is that if ducts are buried in insulation in the ceiling, then they're considered to be within the building thermal envelope, which is a loose interpretation. But the bigger issue is that it changes the testing required for the ducts. If the ducts are in fact within the building thermal envelope, they have to be tested, total duct leakage testing from within the building, so that you know if there is leakage, that it gets adjusted so that the air is getting to the space it's supposed to get to. It might all well be leaking into the thermal envelope, into the conditioned space, and so you're not losing energy to the outside. But if you're not getting it from, from the source of the heated air to where it needs to go, the far off bedroom, then it's still a problem. This provision changes the testing so that it's air leakage to the outside, which is definitely a very different standard for these ducts that are buried in ceiling insulation. And again, we have an estimate of energy loss on this particular provision of something like 1 to 2%. Not substantial, but I mean it sort of wipes away anything that we got from the 2015 code over the 2012 code. The other thing that happened with this particular provision is that even when buried ducts are included, they used to have an insulation requirement of R18. That has since been changed in this proposal to R13. So in general, we consider this to be, unfortunately, a bit of a rollback and not an improvement for energy efficiency. So then a lost opportunity that we were promoting quite strongly was a proposal that EECC had written called Builder Flex, RE179. What this proposal did was offer builders the flexible choices, really lots of choices for how to add an additional 5% of energy efficiency to the current level of the code. And I'm going to show you, this is just a edited version of the chart that was in the proposal. The point being that we had, 1A through 8C, I think there were 36 options written into this chart that show, depending on what climate zone you're in, certain measures would give you a certain number of points, and the objective was you needed to have 5 on top of the code provisions that existed for the envelope otherwise in the code. So this would have been at least a 5% increase in energy efficiency, putting us on that glide path that we looked at earlier, possibly more depending on what got adopted in any given home, but the minimum required would have been 5. It was seen as being too complicated. It was seen as being, oh my gosh, another compliance path, which in fact, yes, it would be. And I'm really sorry that was the attitude taken on this, because I do think that this kind of fits nicely with the philosophy behind the ERI and HERS in terms of, a simply understood system of evaluating energy efficiency numerically that consumers can understand, that builders can certainly work with, provide a lot of flexibility for how to make things happen depending what part of the country you're in and what the market is for different types of equipment and materials. So it's unfortunate that this one did fail, so we lost really the only proposal that was in there that would have added substantial energy efficiency up to 5%. So what does all this mean in terms of where we are going with the code in the next cycle? I don't think that there are clear winners. If you consider to be the people who are pushing hard against very progressive energy efficiency for economic reasons or other reasons, and then the people who are pushing very hard for energy efficiency improvements, I can't think that either side walks away feeling good. However, I think that it's really unfortunate. I think that home buyers and certainly the environment are losers in this process. We did not get a jump in energy efficiency, certainly not in any substantial way. We will be lucky if we get another 1 to 2% from the DOE determination. DOE has once these codes are published, which will happen early in 2017, the Department of Energy will do an analysis, careful analysis of the new code compared to the old code, and if it is improved or more stringent than the previous code, they issue what is called a positive determination, and then the states are sort of on the hook for at least looking at these codes and considering adopting them to improve energy efficiency of what's being built in the states. If it does not meet their standard of improving over the previous code, will they issue a negative determination? I don't know. I don't think they've ever done that. I've been told that they have issued a neutral determination, which seems like a likely possibility in this case. But what does this mean relative to future code adoptions? What does this mean to future code development? Where should we be going? What can we rely on? Are the codes working for us as a tool? If you remember having looked at this slide showing you, kind of outlining what the problem is, and this slide as to how we wanted to get to a solution, I think it's fair to say that the current code process, certainly based on this past cycle, it's not going to get us there. And we can certainly do amendments to these codes as they are adopted state by state and in local jurisdictions, but we really need to take a look at what we're doing in the national code development process and determine whether this is the tool to get us to net zero, or should we be looking at other policy drivers. So that's all I have. I am happy to answer questions to the extent that I have the information. And Mike, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Great, Maureen. Thank you very much. And I certainly would encourage our audience to submit questions using the questions box on the right side. In fact, we've got one from Khalid. Earlier you were talking about the insulated and uninsulated slabs, and you mentioned that they were heated or not heated, and Khalid was just looking for a clarification on that. Were you meaning unisolated, or can you explain what you were talking about when you were saying unheated slabs?
I can. A heated slab meaning with the the tubing, the integrated radiant slab. So it's got the hot water running through it. It is a warm slab. So currently there is not a requirement for complete insulation under that heated slab. And the analysis done by the code change proponent shows that, and I think this is, you're going to say, duh, there's a lot more heat loss when you have a heated slab sitting on uninsulated ground than if you have an unheated slab or a standard run-of-the-mill concrete slab sitting on the ground. You're not going to lose as much heat through that unheated slab as you are with the heated slab, because the heated slab is generating heat, which is going straight into the ground. I mean, it just, it really is an obvious thing, assuming that the person explaining it is doing a good job, which I hope I'm doing finally. But the point is that now the requirement will be that that heated slab, that thermal slab, will have to be insulated fully all the way underneath, instead of just 24 inches in from the edges or whatever the current requirement is. Hope that helped.
Gotcha. Okay. So I've got a couple of questions for you, Maureen. As someone who has participated in these hearings in the past, you and I both know, and anybody who's either watched on the webcast or gone to these hearings knows, the perpetual debate is always around equipment trade-offs. Can you talk a little bit about how the NACA standards can help resolve this long-standing issue?
Oh my. Okay. So you got two big topics, Mike, thrown into that question. The trade-off question is one where, and by the way, there was a proposal this year to reintroduce equipment trade-offs, quote-unquote equipment trade-offs into the performance path. and it was rejected. And the thinking is, if we put more high efficiency equipment into the building than what is required, we should get credit for that in the performance path and be able to reduce the efficiency of other parts of the building, such as the envelope. In theory, that makes good sense. The problem is that the equipment in the marketplace, well, let's start with the equipment that's required. The minimum requirement of efficiency of equipment is set by the federal government, not by the building code. The building code cannot address the efficiency of HVAC equipment. So it is set by a separate set of laws entirely, and the states are not allowed to adopt something more stringent. You're just stuck. That's the best you can require. Now, obviously, you can install something much more efficient than what's required as that minimum standard, and that's in fact what happens. So what you know is that most of the equipment in the marketplace is better than what's required by the federal minimum standard at this point, because builders have been putting in more efficient equipment, and so what's in the marketplace exceeds the minimum standard required. So you're putting in equipment that you would have been putting in anyway, but you're taking a credit for it and reducing the stringency of your envelope. And so that argument just really doesn't hold water with the ICC voting members. They've rejected this particular proposal 3-4 times now, I think. So your question, how could the NAICA process, NAICA being the organization that sets these standards, I think, is that right? Is that the organization's acronym?
Yeah. Yeah.
If they would bring the standards up to where the marketplace is for this equipment, or ideally beyond that, so that in fact we are setting a standard that we need to reach to, I think it would help a lot. It would certainly make it a lot more difficult to argue against the equipment trade-off if you started saying, well, we're going to put in more efficient equipment than what's in the marketplace. We have to actually go and find exceptional equipment. But that seems to be a process that's on its own time frame, and not one we can influence through the code process. So, until and unless the NAICA process brings the efficiency requirements up to where we need them to be to match what's in fact being installed, then I think we're going to have to continue to oppose this equipment trade-off proposal.
Gotcha. Got a question from David. He says, we saw how ARA funding motivated states to adopt the 2009 IECC or better. Do you see the Paris Climate Accord having a similar effect?
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry for laughing. I'm in Washington, D.C. We're all pretty bruised and jaded at this point. I'd like to think that that would be the case. Obviously, that has to translate into some kind of federal policy or state policy. In the United States, our best federal policy, and I use that term in quotes, is the model codes that are developed through the ICC and ASHRAE process and then adopted by the states as law. I think, what I can show you now is what 2018 didn't do with the Paris Accord in mind. Clearly, that is not the driving motivator for the people who are voting on these codes. So I worry about that. Money is a huge motivator. The ERA funding coming out of the federal government is a very substantial motivator was a very substantial motivator for the states. Keep in mind also that that money was for the states and in fact for policymakers to put in place certain practices in order to get that money. Whereas these codes being developed, they're being developed by us, by people who are in the trenches, by code officials, by builders, by design professionals, not high-level policymakers. So it's a very different focus on what's important and what the future holds. So I don't know that the codes are going to be the tool to get us to where we need to go. And much as I'd like to think that the Paris Agreement is going to influence U.S. energy policy, I'm not holding my breath.
Right. Another question from Sarah. You didn't talk too much about solar trade-offs in your presentation, but that was one of the topics covered at the hearing as well. She's curious, is this issue of solar trade-offs, is it over and agreed to, or are we going to see further push from production builders in the future for more?
Really good question. I tried to address it. I guess I didn't use that terminology, and I didn't talk about the admin provisions. The solar trade-off is, as I was trying to describe, if we say that solar, well, as you know, if you are familiar with the HERS process, the ResNet process, that score includes all energy consumed in the building. So remember, the code only covers 66% of the building energy use. HERS covers everything. So you're getting credit and you're getting debit for things that are not covered by the code. So right there's a complete disconnect between the scale of what HERS evaluates compared to what the code evaluates. But more importantly, HERS allows credit internally for on-site renewable energy. And the very strict interpretation of the International Energy Conservation Code is that the code is about energy conservation, not about energy production. So there was this huge war shaping up on this issue. And, should solar be included? And if so, what does it mean to the HERS numbers that are identified in the code? So you saw how that was resolved with a compromise that if you're doing on-site renewables, you must meet a stronger standard for the building envelope than you would if you were not including on-site renewables. To go back to the question as to trade-offs in general, several of the administrative proposals, and that would be proposals that would go into the Chapter 1 of all the codes, were designed to change the meaning, change the intent of the IECC from focusing on the conservation of energy to the conservation and production of energy, or focusing on the energy consumed in a building to the net energy consumed in a building. So that there were all these proposals that were going into the language describing the purpose and scope of the energy code that would have created a sliding door for renewables to go in and be used to trade off the efficiency of the building envelope. They were all rejected. I'm happy to say they were all rejected, that the purpose and scope of the energy code is as it has been, and it is focused on the conservation of energy, period. Does this mean that that we won't continue to have pushback and problems and some new problem that we haven't even envisioned yet? Yeah, we probably will. But I think that this compromise that was reached on RE 173 was a really good one. And LBA and NAHB were party to this, along with all the energy efficiency proponents, along with a lot of the insulation manufacturers and the American Chemistry Council. There were a lot of parties involved in that compromise. So I do think it's going to tamp down the big fires for the short term.
You spoke about 173 and the slightly higher numbers in the ERI path. With the passage of ResNet 301, I've heard that the change from the original HERS to ResNet 301 is actually going to cause HERS indices to come in slightly higher than before for the exact same home. Have you heard that? And if that is indeed true, wouldn't the slight raising of the levels end up being a neutral move?
Well, Mike, you just asked a question that I cannot answer.
Okay.
I don't have any information on what the adoption of ResNet 301 means to the numbers. Mike's referring to one of the proposals that was accepted by the membership that would require that the standard used for the ERI be, in fact, be the ResNet standard. Before this code cycle, it was kind of loosey-goosey language that left it open that if there were another standard out there, that it could be used as well. And there were many of us who thought it should stay loosey-goosey and not be very specific as to specifying this other code, essentially. But the members chose to adopt this HERS, and it is a HERS, a ResNet ICC standard. But I did have the impression that the numbers would change a little bit, but I don't have any more information on it than that, Mike. Sorry.
Gotcha. No, it's okay. It's okay. I certainly want to encourage people to submit their questions through the questions box. We're going to keep going here. Michelle had a question. You had a slide earlier, net zero by 2050. That you'd like to see a glide path towards that. It's well behind California's goal and the 2030 challenge. What can be done to realize that net zero goal sooner?
Oh my God, I wish I knew. This is, now we're totally off into the realm of Maureen's opinion. And the reason we set that slide, and I would go back, but I don't know how to do it quickly, so I'm afraid I would, lose a lot of you just flipping back through a slide. But the reason we showed that trajectory to 2050 is because it's a lot less scary looking at that slope than it is if we show it to where we need it to be, which is 2030. It's a much steeper slope. Much bigger changes need to happen much, much faster for the national model energy codes to be taking us to where we need to go. Now, the problem is that, and code officials and these voting members will continue to make this point, that the building codes are the minimum standard. They are not the maximum. They are not everyone must, strive to reach these criteria. This is the minimum, and you can always do better. The reality is, lots of people do build better, but many build right to code, and in fact, many don't even meet code. So, to assume that the code, particularly given this mindset and this process, assume that the code is going to be the best tool for taking us on that trajectory to net zero, I think is probably a mistake. And certainly this code cycle bears out that prediction. I think we're going to have to start looking at other public policy drivers, like California has, although California has a better code, but other policy drivers like a lot of municipalities have relative to carbon goals that have to drive other issues that relate to buildings, whether they are incentive-driven, whether they are, penalty-driven, whether they're tied to licensure for design professionals and contractors. I don't know the answer. There is no one answer, I'm certain, but I'm pretty clear that the codes are going to only be a very small piece of the solution and not our primary vehicle for getting to net zero.
When you talk about some of these policy drivers, do you have precedents or examples you can cite or look at?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of things happening in more progressive jurisdictions. One of the most effective things that's going on is a very simple policy for energy disclosure in buildings, and a lot of the big cities across the country have instituted this and are starting to keep databases of how much energy a building uses, and it's all relative. So a newer building built very well to a very high standard is going to have a lower EUI, or energy use intensity, than perhaps an older building built less well, or not having been maintained well. So once people start to see how their building performs, once this becomes public information, and they start to see how their building performs compared to other buildings that are in the comparable range from the real estate market perspective, they start investing in energy efficiency. And in fact, New York City has policies for requiring commissioning of buildings, requiring retro commissioning of buildings every 10 years. The public energy information is fully disclosed, public information on how much energy these buildings use. Now, it's only the largest buildings right now, but even that is going to start ratcheting down. So those are pretty simple policies now that they have a huge impact, because what changes people's behavior is how it affects them financially. And once they start to see that my building is not going to be as attractive in the real estate market as the one next door, I better do something about it. And as people become aware of energy consumption as a factor in the value of their real estate, I think that's going to change enormously. So there's a lot of examples. BCAP has a lot of examples on our website. that I would encourage you to take a look at. And anybody can email me, and I could send you a lot of other information as well.
Well, in addition to the information that's on the BCAP site, I know that the Institute for Market Transformation has, and I'm going to apologize to you and the audience and Cliff for not remembering the exact name, but they have that project that they've got going on with major cities. It's up to 20 now. It used to be 10. New York was one of them, that they're starting to do exactly what you just described, is track the usage of energy in commercial buildings. Do you recall the name of that project that they're doing?
It's called the City Energy Project. Pretty simple, and good for you for mentioning it. That's also something really exciting that people should take a look at IMT's website for more information on that project. City Energy Project.
Keep that crown on your head there for a minute, Maureen. We're going to stay in the land of Maureen with this next question. We saw water efficiency proposals considered by both the commercial and residential energy code committees. Reduced showerhead flow rates were passed into the commercial energy code, but not the residential code, and all of that is pending IECC board determination and approval. But this whole topic, water efficiency, seems to be a hot potato. It gets kicked around from the plumbing code to the green code to the energy code. If it were up to you, where would water efficiency reside?
If it were up to me, oh my goodness, thank you. Water, it's efficiency of the fixtures, efficiency of the system, and I think it belongs in, the energy code. The link between energy and water consumption is very strong. I mean, just think about it. It takes energy to heat the water. It takes energy to pump the water. It takes energy to, recirculate the water. It's quite a substantial energy factor. And I think that the idea that there would be restrictions on energy consumption through flow rates, etc. Look, if it doesn't go in the energy code, it can go in the plumbing code. Honestly, I don't care. But many states adopt locally written plumbing codes. Many jurisdictions have things that are written by their plumbers' unions. You may all be familiar with examples of that. The states are required to adopt energy codes. So to me, it's a safer bet that will get efficiencies if it goes into the energy code than if it goes into one of the other I codes. So that's my answer.
All right. Last call for questions. Last call for questions. I've got one more, and it is, clarify for me a little bit, Maureen. Energy codes have an effect on, I want to say it's insurance rates for municipalities. Is that correct?
Yes. There is an organization, oh my gosh, am I going to have a hard time remembering this? It's got an acronym that's similar to another organization that does ratings. And they evaluate municipalities for a whole bunch of risk factors, and a very small portion of that risk analysis has to do with what codes are adopted, what type of enforcement is in place, what kind of staff is in place, and they get points, added or deducted depending on where they stand up to some standard. It's a pretty limited evaluation relative to the codes piece. We've tried working with these folks to get that beefed up, particularly focusing on resilience risk and how the codes can help with that. We haven't had much success yet in that, but that is something we continue to do. I really apologize that off the top of my head I'm not remembering the acronym for this organization, but yes, it's true. In fact, I live in Pennsylvania, and we adopted a statewide building code in 1999 specifically because there was a threat of losing insurability because we didn't have any kind of statewide building code. We really had very minimal code standards in Pennsylvania, and they were spottily enforced. And the General Assembly got the word that we can't really help you unless you are helping yourself. So there's definitely a link, and it's part of the toolkit of arguments that can be used to help get more modern codes adopted.
Well, I bring it up because, and I hate to put you on the spot there, Maureen, but I bring it up because it seems to me that it is a fairly influential factor, but you don't ever hardly hear anything about it, read anything about it, and it's kind of amazing because here you've got this situation where, you know, insurance rates could go up, or it could be, you know, you could risk not even having insurance at all if it's shown that you aren't keeping current with your codes.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's currently a relatively small piece of a much, much larger analysis that this organization does. But I do think that with a higher focus on resilience and, you know, resisting weather events and being able to recover from weather events, I think that it's going to be increasing in prominence. So hang on to that, Mike. I don't think we should give up on that. I think that's one that we're going to see more opportunities for us going forward.
Yeah. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I want to thank Maureen for sharing her time and knowledge with us today. Any parting thoughts?
No, thank you very much for sticking around. I appreciate it. Please feel free to get in touch with me or check out BCAP's website. If we can provide you with any further information, we are delighted to do so. And thank you, Mike, very much for inviting me.
No problem. Thank you also to our audience for attending and asking great questions, and certainly to NV Energy for their generous sponsorship of this webinar series. You know, this is going to be our final webinar of 2016, and this has been an unusual year filled with many surprises. Whether you celebrate a holiday in the coming weeks or not, I believe the end of the calendar year provides us all with a time to reflect on what has transpired and a chance to look ahead. And it's in that looking ahead that we typically seek out ways to improve. That might mean making improvements to our body, our home, a vehicle, our overall life, community, or our planet. If you're looking to improve your community or your planet, I would encourage you to join me at the Sustainability Symposium in Orlando on January 9th. I'm going to be there, and I hope I get the chance to meet you and talk with you and work with you. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, February 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be a special presentation from Bosch titled Building Smarter Cities and Communities. Hopefully, I see you on January 9th, and if not, then back here on February 22nd. Until then, have a safe and happy New Year.